Hi, this is Amanda with Chesapeake Marine Training Institute. Today we're going to be talking about the licensing qualification as well as the application procedures for OUPV 6-pack through the Master 100 gross ton. So what license do you qualify for? The smallest license requires at least 360 days of underway time back to the age of 16. On vessels of less than 100 gross ton, a day is considered 8 hours unless the officer in charge of the marine inspection determines that that vessel's operating schedule makes that criteria inappropriate. But in no case can a day be considered less than 4 hours. All licenses require at least 90 days of recency, meaning 90 days in the last 3 years. And the Coast Guard will use that recency to help determine what size tonnage license you would qualify for. So first, we're going to talk about the operator of uninspected passenger vessels. You may have also heard this license referred to as the 6-pack license. So for this license, it would require a minimum of 360 days underway back to the age of 16 on vessels at least 16 foot or greater. So with the 6-pack license, you are restricted to no more than 6 passengers on uninspected vessels of less than 100 gross ton. To get a near coastal authority on that 6-pack license, you would need to be able to show at least 90 days of experience on ocean or near coastal waters. Typically, when they're talking about near coastal waters, they're referring to beyond the boundary line, usually the line of demarcation. Now we're going to talk about the Master 25, 50, or 100 gross ton. For the inland license, the sea time requirement will be 360 days underway. Again, that sea time can go back to the age of 16 on vessels 16 foot or greater. In order to get a near coastal master license, 25 through 100 gross ton, you would need to show a total of 720 days of sea time back to the age of 16 on vessels 16 foot or greater. Out of that total 720 days, at least 360 days must be on near coastal or ocean waters. Now we're going to talk about gross registered ton. So what is a gross registered ton? Is a measurement of volume, not weight. 1 gross registered ton is equal to 100 cubic feet of enclosed space. Enclosed meaning watertight. So the Coast Guard has 2 different formulas to help determine the gross tonnage of recreational vessels. There's one formula for power boats, and then there's a formula for sailboats. So when we're talking about power boats, the formula that you're going to use to try to help determine the gross tonnage of your vessel would be the formula listed here. So you would take the length overall times the width of the beam times the depth from the gunwale to the keel. You're going to divide that by 100 and then multiply by 0.67. So when trying to determine the gross tonnage for sailboats, we're going to use that same formula that we used for power boats, except we're going to multiply by 0.5. Now this should give us a pretty good rough estimate on what these vessels should be coming in at for gross tonnage. However, if the vessel is documented or registered, they're going to go by the documentation. Next, we're going to look at what size license you can expect to get from the Coast Guard. So the Coast Guard also has 2 different formulas to help determine the tonnage of your license as well. They have the 25% rule and the 50% rule, keeping in mind that they're going to use whatever one benefits you the most. But let's take a look on how we would try to calculate that. So starting with the 25% rule, we're going to use the 100 ton as an example. So notice that we're talking inland license. So for an inland 100 ton license, the minimum service, as you can see stated here, is 360 days. Out of that 360 days, 25%, which would be 90 days, would need to be on a vessel 51 gross ton or larger to get 100 ton inland. So now let's look at the near coastal. So you'll notice down here where it says 100 ton. So for the near coastal requirement, we're going to be required to show a total of 720 days. Keeping in mind that at least half of your time has to be on near coastal waters. So out of that 720, you need to show at least 360 days on near coastal waters. And then 25% of your time, which would be 180 days, would need to be on a vessel 51 gross ton or larger. Now we're going to look at the 50% rule. So for the 100 ton, looking at an inland license, you would need 360 days. Out of that 360, 50% of your time, so 180 days, would need to be on the vessel 34 gross ton or larger. And looking at the near coastal 100 ton, you would need 720 days total, keeping in mind that at least 360 of those days has to specifically be on near coastal waters, and then at least 360 need to be on a vessel 34 gross ton or larger. So again, whatever one benefits you the most is what they're going to use, whether you've got more time on smaller tonnage vessels or less time on bigger tonnage vessels. So a question we often get asked a lot is, will CMTI's 100-ton course allow me to run a tugboat? So not entirely. There's been a lot of changes in the tug licensing rules over the years. So let's talk about that a little bit. So the Coast Guard NAVIC 0401 changed the entire procedure for licensing of operators on uninspected towing vessels. So now mariners have to start out as an apprentice mate steersman and work their way up to the wheelhouse. So at CMTI, you can complete all the courses that are required in order to get on that path as an apprentice mate. So for many of you, it's the course that you're taking now, the Master 25 through 100 gross ton, along with our Master Mate 200 ton upgrade, as well as the Apprentice Mate Steersman. With the exception of First Aid and CPR, those would be all the courses required in order to get on the path as an Apprentice Mate Steersman. So this gives us a quick little glimpse on what it's going to take to get to the wheelhouse for mariners starting out as an apprentice mate steersman. So as you'll notice, for an apprentice mate, you need to show a total service of 18 months. So that's just total sea time. Again, going back to the age of 16. But being mindful of that, at least 12 months, at least 360 days needs to be specifically on a towing vessel. Doesn't really matter what you were serving as. It can be as an ordinary seaman, deckhand, whatever the case may be. It just needs to specifically be on a towing vessel. Then once you complete your apprentice mate steersman course and all your other courses, you're ready to turn in your paperwork. Then you're going to serve as an apprentice mate for 12 months. Once you've held that apprentice mate and you've served for 12 months, then you're ready to apply for your mate of tow. Be mindful that in order to get your mate of tow issued, you do have to have completed basic firefighting as well as your radar observer. So once you've done that and you can show your time while serving as an apprentice mate for 12 months, then you can apply for your mate of tow. Once you get your mate of tow on your license, you'll serve as mate for 18 months to get to master. So all in all, to start out as an apprentice mate and work your way up to the wheelhouse, it's roughly about 2.5, 3-year window. So a common misconception is, does my graduation certificate allow me to be the master on vessels? As you can see, the answer is no. You must hold that actual Coast Guard license in order to serve in that capacity. So your graduation certificate is going to be valid for 1 year. That certificate has to be submitted with your whole application package to the Coast Guard Regional Exam Center, and then everything will be reviewed by them, and then they may issue the license. So depending on how long you've been around the industry, you may notice that the Coast Guard has changed the look of the Coast Guard Merchant Mariner Credential. Just this past March, the Coast Guard has adopted a new format. The new Mariner Credential will replace the legacy passport style red books, along with the associated endorsement labels that would come with them. So you will no longer receive a separate endorsement label. You will receive a whole new credential each time you add endorsements or upgrade your license. The new MMC is designed in a one-page front and back format. It is printed with security features for fraud protection, as well as being printed on waterproof and tear-resistant paper. You can display it flat or folded, either or, and your MMC document number will be found on the little white box on the red part of your credential. So back in 2009, Coast Guard mandated that all mariners must hold a valid TWIC card. That's the Transportation Worker Identification Credential. So in order to apply for your credential, you have to have either applied or be a holder of the TWIC. You can pre-enroll for your TWIC by going online to the tsa.gov/TWIC website, or you can call their 866 number. Once you go online and you pre-enroll, you're going to put in your address and all your personal information. That'll populate the closest TWIC office to you. It'll allow you to create an appointment, and then you can report to that office with your required documents and your payment. They will do your photo, your fingerprints, you'll pay for it, and then they will give you a receipt. That receipt is the only thing that's required in order to go ahead and get your paperwork sent off to the Coast Guard. So if all you have is your receipt and you haven't gotten the card back yet, don't let that stop you from going ahead and submitting your paperwork. Once your TWIC expires, you do have the option to keep it expired or to renew it. I always recommend that you consult your employer first, just to make sure that your job doesn't require you to have it. But the Coast Guard only requires that you have it initially, and then you can choose to renew it if you want. So now we're going to talk about the original license application procedures. So the first form that we're going to talk about is the CG 719B, which is the Coast Guard's application form. So this is the main application where you're going to give them all your personal information, your name, your address, your email address, phone number, and all the other required information. You're also going to tell them what you're applying for. So whether you're just applying for one thing or 10 things, you need to list it all in the application so they know what to evaluate you for. On the second page of the application, they're going to ask questions in regards to convictions, such as DUIs, DWIs, reckless driving, etc. So if you need to check yes to any of those questions, make sure that you provide the conviction sheet along with the supporting information so they have enough information to go off of. If it's something that you've already disclosed with the Coast Guard, you're not required to keep submitting that. So if they're aware of it, then you're good. You don't need to keep restating that information. But if it's a new conviction that has happened, maybe since your last application, or it's a new conviction that they're not aware of, you definitely need to make them aware of that. The last page of the application is going to be for a third-party authorization. So that would be somebody like us that would be helping maybe assist you with your paperwork, and you want to give them permission for us to speak on your behalf. Moving along, the next form is the Small Vessel Sea Service form. So that is the CG 719S, and that is the form that they would use to document time either on personally owned vessels or even company-owned vessels, as long as the vessel is under 200 gross ton. So if you are documenting personal time and your vessel is under 200 gross ton, you can use this form and you're going to document day for day. It's going to be set up similar to like a calendar. So you'll have January through December on the form, and it'll have 5 lines under each month. So that allows you to get up to 5 years of sea time on each form. You will total your number of days, and then you're going to need to break down how many of your days were either on Great Lakes, if any, shoreward, which is going to be inland time, and then seaward, which is going to be near coastal time. So you need to break that down so they can give you a fair estimate on where your time was accumulated. On the second page of that Small Vessel Sea Service form, on the top will be your signature as the applicant, and then the bottom signature area would be if you're the owner of the vessel. If you're not the owner of the vessel, the owner needs to fill out that bottom portion. If you are the owner of the vessel, you are required to show proof of ownership. So whether it be your proof of documentation or your registration card, or even if you've sold the boat, the bill of sale, that will need to be provided along with that small vessel sea service form. However, if you're not the owner of the vessel, all they have to do is sign that form. They are not required to show proof of ownership. If you have a hard time tracking down your ownership or your documentation and it was documented in the state of Virginia, you can reach out to like the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries and they will do a search of every vessel that was ever titled to you. What they provide you is acceptable for the Coast Guard. The other alternative to documenting your sea time would be on company letterhead. So if you've worked with a company and they can put it on letterhead and state your total days, that is acceptable by the Coast Guard, as long as it's signed by a company official. Again, if you've owned the boat that you're trying to document time on, make sure that you provide a copy of that proof of documentation or your registration. Next, we're going to talk about the physical exam. So the Coast Guard will require that you have a physical. The physical does need to be dated within the previous 12 months, and it does need to be on the actual Coast Guard form, that's CG 719K. Pretty much any doctor can do these physicals. It's more so just making sure that they have the equipment and to do the tests that are required. So you will have to have a vision test done as well as a hearing test. So as long as they're equipped to handle those, you shouldn't have an issue having that done. Just it's very important that it gets done on that 719K and that gets returned to you. Once you complete the physical and you submit it to the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard approves your physical, they will issue a medical certificate, and that's the picture listed here. So the medical certificate is going to have all your information on it, and basically it's telling the Coast Guard that your medical is now good for 5 years if applying for a national endorsement, which is where your captain's license or your 6-pack license would fall under. So you'll notice that everybody gets the same medical certificate. So everybody's going to have 3 expiration dates on their certificate. There's going to be one that says STCW, there's going to be one that says national, and one that says pilot. STCW and pilot will be for those specific mariners. Mariners that hold STCW endorsements and pilot endorsements will need to get a physical every 2 years. However, if you just hold a national endorsement, like your captain's license or your 6-pack or your towing endorsement, those are required for 5 years. So you will only have to have a physical every 5 years. So now we're going to talk about the drug screen. The Coast Guard will require a DOT USCG SAMHSA 5 drug screen. It will need to be done on the required form, which is that CG 719P, and the drug screen is only valid for 6 months. So you'll need to have your drug screen form submitted to the Coast Guard within that 6-month window. So the form here listed will have all the information that's required. The most important thing with the drug screening is that you have to get it done by a Coast Guard approved lab, and not all labs are Coast Guard approved. So just make sure that you're able to take this form in and confirm with the lab that they're able to fill it out, they're approved, and they're able to get it back to you. That's the most important part. Down at the bottom, you'll notice where it says medical review officer. So a lot of times that's where you run into problems. If the lab doesn't have an MRO to sign off, don't get the drug screen done there because it will not be accepted by the Coast Guard. The other alternative to the drug screen is if you're on a random drug screen program, either with your employer or another consortium. So if you are enrolled in a program and you've been enrolled for at least 180 days, the employer can put it on their letterhead and state the required information on there, that you basically haven't failed or refused to take a test. That is acceptable by the Coast Guard. Again, all letters or drug test forms need to be dated within 6 months of getting to the Coast Guard. The CMTI can assist you with your application package. We'll provide you with all the current forms. We'll give you the correct wording for all your sample letters. We can arrange for your physical and drug screen through our doctor. We will also review your sea time and make sure everything is correct and complete and ready to be submitted. Like any government agency, the Coast Guard is very particular about how the application and supporting documentation is completed. Having CMTI assist you with it, we're just more familiar with the process, so it's less chance for mistakes and less delay in getting your merchant mariner credential. If you do choose to have us assist you with your application package, we can give you an appointment to come meet with us. We encourage you to bring as much information as you can. However, if you don't have a lot, that's okay. We're going to give you a checklist and some other things to kind of get started with. And that's our only rule. You can't shoot the messenger. We're just following these policies, as silly as they may be sometimes. We do always recommend that you complete all the paperwork as soon as possible. It's crazy how fast time flies sometimes, and we are not allowed to extend any certificates beyond the 1 year that you're already given. So for your captain's license and your 6-pack, all those deck license courses, you have a 1-year window, meaning that that certificate has to be submitted to the Coast Guard with all your paperwork within that 1 year. So if CMTI is assisting you with your paperwork, we will submit your paperwork for the highest license that we see that you're qualified for. The Coast Guard does evaluate on a case-by-case basis, and they do have evaluators up there trained to handle different levels of credentials. Sometimes they see things differently, but that's what we're there for. So the only other required course that you'll be needing is the first aid and CPR. First aid and CPR is a requirement for any original license. The Coast Guard requires that first aid and CPR be completed within 1 year of submitting your application to them. Not all courses are Coast Guard approved, so be aware and make sure if you're taking it on the outside that the course that you're taking is Coast Guard approved. You would check with the provider, see if they're able to tell you by giving you some type of course completion with a course code on there. Typically, if you took it through American Heart Association, they would be able to provide you with some type of certificate that would have a code that would start somewhere like AHA followed by a number sequence. That typically tells you that it's Coast Guard approved. But when in doubt, definitely ask the provider because you don't want to waste time and money on a class that's not going to be accepted by the Coast Guard. We know our course is approved because we submit ours directly to the National Maritime Center. But again, if you're doing it on the outside, just double check with the provider to make sure that the class that you're taking is in fact Coast Guard approved. So regardless the number of endorsements that you're requesting on your Coast Guard application, only one evaluation fee and one issuance fee will be required. So it's important that as much as you can put on your application, the better off that you'll be. You're going to pay $145 typically for a Coast Guard fee for an original license. So whether you apply for one thing or you apply for 10 things, you're still going to pay that $145. So it definitely would benefit you to put as much as you can on an application. Typically, when we're assisting a captain's license application, we will encourage them to go ahead and check the box for the entry-level mariner. There's nothing else required of this other than merely just checking a box. What this allows a mariner that if you're on a vessel over 100 gross ton, if you're trying to get on a tugboat possibly and start working as like a deckhand or an ordinary seaman, again, no additional paperwork is needed. It's just a matter of checking a box. So make sure if you're doing your own paperwork that you go ahead and give yourself that endorsement. Now we're going to talk about some optional endorsements. These are not required. However, again, in talking about bundling as much as you can on the application, if this is of interest to you, it might be beneficial to go ahead and do this, put it on the same application. So we're going to start with the auxiliary sail. The auxiliary sail endorsement, you do have to have sail experience for this. You need to have a minimum of 180 days for an inland license. And this endorsement would allow licensed master to carry passengers for hire on sail auxiliary sail vessels. So this is an add-on endorsement. Typically, it'll be in one evening. It's normally on the second week of the captain's license course. Or if you can't make the in-class portion, we do have it available online as well. Next, we're going to talk about the commercial assistance towing. So this allows a licensed operator or master to tow disabled vessels for higher consideration. So your organizations like CTOW or Boat US typically are going to require that you have this endorsement on your license in order to work for them. Again, you can choose to do this in class or you can do it online. With any of the classes that you do online, once you complete your required clock hours, then it's just a matter of calling the school and scheduling a time to come in and test. You'll get a separate certificate for the endorsement, and again, it'll be a separate endorsement on your license. There's nothing required to keep it on your license, it'll just renew with C-Time. This next endorsement is the STCW. It stands for the Standards of Training, Certification, and Watchkeeping. So the STCW is our basic safety training course and is required for mariners that intend to go in and out of foreign ports. So essentially anything other than domestic waters. The STCW course consists of the basic firefighting, the personal safety and social responsibilities, personal survival techniques, and first aid and CPR. This is a week-long course. It does require to be renewed every 5 years. Next is the radar observer. Radar observer is not required for licenses under 300 gross ton unless you're operating a towing vessel. And we're not talking commercial assistance, we're talking actual tugboat. So when you go to apply for your mate of tow, you will be required to have the radar endorsement at that time. So if you haven't had a chance to check out our ship store, now's a great time to do it. We have a lot of good study aids, apparel, all kinds of good resources on there. There's also the Rules of the Road subscription online. If you haven't heard about that yet, feel free to check that out on our website. It's very similar to the Rules of the Road computers that we have here at the school, but you would have the flexibility of being able to use that at home on your phone or your laptop when you're not here at the school. So now we're moving on to renewal of your license. So we all know time flies, but your license is valid for 5 years from date of issue. The Coast Guard does notify you 90 days out of expiration to kind of give you a heads up to let you know it's coming. However, I highly encourage you to start much sooner than that. If you do forget to renew your license, you do have a 1-year grace period. But make sure you don't go beyond that grace period. Otherwise, you will have to retake courses or retest at the Coast Guard. The renewal process consists of a new application to the Coast Guard. You'll be required to complete a new physical and drug screen, as well as you will need to show 360 days over the previous 5 years. So let's say maybe you didn't use the license as much as you thought and you're running a little short on the 360. So you have a couple options. You can either request an open book exam when you go to submit your paperwork to the Coast Guard, or you can choose to take a refresher course. Don't wait until your license expires to renew. Processing times constantly vary, but right now, currently, are taking about 2.5 to 3 months. Sometimes more, sometimes less. But always be mindful that you can renew your license up to 8 months ahead of time without losing any time on your license. So once you submit your application and they process your license, your new license will be dated to kick in when your old one falls off. That way it's out of sight, out of mind, and it's off your plate to try to remember. So maybe you still have questions that I haven't addressed, or maybe you're confused on something. Please feel free to send us an email at the info@ChesapeakeMarineInst.com or contact us at the office at 804-642-0123. Thanks and have a great day.